Guys, good morning. Good to see you all. I remember 2 years ago was my last time actually on the Uzakrota conference in real life. Last year was already online. I was hoping for this year to be back in person in beautiful Istanbul, but unfortunately we're online. But I'm happy to see you all. So let's make a great session, and nice to see you from different places all over the world. I guess a few guys from the Netherlands as well. I think, Marc, you're in Germany.
Yeah, correct.
And you, George? I'm not sure if George can hear me, but not sure. Okay, great. Oh, let's start. I think the audience is waiting for amazing answers, and let's make it interactive. Yeah, we can hear you now, George.
Hi guys, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Because
Perfect.
I can hear you with some looping around as well.
Okay. Well, probably will be hopefully working soon. Well, of course, let's for the listeners first tell who you are, what is your business doing, and then we go more in deep and in depth more about online business, which is the topic of today. I guess, well, online and travel is there. I think it's pretty equal to each other. It's like I can imagine even online booking online travel without online anymore, right? And well, let's start with some introductions. Let's start with Nishank. Good morning. Tell a bit about yourself and amusement.
Sure. Thanks, Michael. And thank you, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. I'm Nishank, and I lead B2B distribution at TUI Musement. TUI Musement is the tours and activities business of the TUI Group. So essentially, we manage two main businesses, if I were to call it that. One is our B2C business, where we are selling tours and activities to the TUI customer. So in 2019, we had close to 20 million customers who took a holiday with TUI. And we sell a excursion, an attraction ticket, a guided tour to those travelers. And then the second half of the business, which is what I represent, is our B2B business, where we power attractions, activities, tickets for some of the largest travel brands in the world. Examples are OTAs like Booking.com, cruise lines like Royal Caribbean, Carnival. We power a lot of their shore excursions, and also other airlines like Qatar. So yeah, that's who we are, and really excited to be here. Thanks, Michael.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Nishank, and good to have you here, Marc.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Marc, CEO of CheckMyBus. What we are the leading metasearch for intercity buses. So this is a little bit like Kayak or Skyscanner for flights. This is the same thing we do for buses. Buses for touristic purposes. So that's why we also love to speak in the travel environment, of course, but also for simple domestic, let's say, transportation between two places. Another segment that we have is basically very global. We are present in 80 countries. In terms of bus stops, airport connections are also very important segments. So, for example, from the Istanbul airport, if we would be live here in Istanbul to the city, you can take the bus for about €3. It's a bit cheaper than a cab, which costs you €40 and is in the same traffic jam when you enter the city. So our mission is to make bus mobility simple, and that's in the first place, make it visible for everyone in the world, which not necessarily is the case for buses. This is a little bit of a less digital vertical. So it's about 15% of the bookings are online. A big portion is still offline at the terminals. So for us, the title makes probably a little bit more sense. Excited to be here and looking forward to a great discussion.
I can't wait to ask you some more questions and get your view on a few things. But before we're doing this, I'm moving first to Matthijs.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Nice to be here. My name is Matthijs Keij, CEO of Withlocals, and we are in the tours and activities industry. We operate a marketplace, which in a nutshell means that we connect travelers on one hand to local guides on the other hand, and we have a mix of professional tour guides, but also people who have a passion for food, for instance. They can be a chef in a restaurant, and then in the weekend, they turn into a tour guide because they really want to explain their passion for food, tell travelers all about their city, So we are doing that in 62 cities all across the world. And I think the really major thing that helps us stand out from some other players is personalization. And I'm sure we get to talk about that later on.
Well, super nice. I love this whole industry. Maybe just a short story in between, and then we're moving to George. I remember when I moved more than 5 years ago, actually from the Netherlands to Krakow, where we have the office of Bidroom. I had a truck. There was like a lot of space left. So what I did, I actually took 20 Dutch bicycles with me, moved them to Krakow. Actually starting also doing bike tours. It was more than 5 years ago. Found a guide in there who could do it. Unfortunately, the guy was ill or he went for a party, so I had to replace him a few times. So I was like a tour guide for more than 10 times. I didn't know much about the city that time, but at least it was good fun.
Oh,
So,
nice.
I have experience being a tour guide. So I don't want to say good tour guide, but I did it once in my life. So George, good to have you here.
Good to be here. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, everyone. I'm George Dumitru. I'm the CEO of wbe.travel. We are a software company, a travel tech company. We are powering travel companies with technology. We have built a platform, an enterprise platform for the last more than 10 years, about 13 years, I think. That it's acting in a way like a marketplace as well for our clients. And our clients they are using our platform to be able to connect to different suppliers of inventory from different services like hotels, flights, tours and activities, car rentals, and using our technology to make it to distribute it to their audience. Could be other travel agents like in B2B channels, or directly to the end traveler using OTA-like systems. We are doing just the technology, so we don't sell rooms, we don't sell services at all. We just facilitate to our clients the buying and the selling of what they need. So
perfect. Well, thank you so much, George. Well, I heard there's more than 1.5 year pandemic taking place. I think that's the reason as well that we're not meeting in person now, unfortunately. And of course, there's a lot of discussions. How is the recovery going to be? You see some people in the US said, okay, actually it's coming back to levels as pre-pandemic. You see, of course, a lot of movement into different alternative accommodations. You see vacation rental is more popular than ever before. Hotels are struggling, hoping for recovery. So a lot of things are happening actually in this pandemic. Of course, as well, I spoke with Luc from Tickets. Is it in Focus right 1.5 weeks ago? I said, okay, actually our recovery is amazing because actually places goes to contactless, etc. So actually we see a huge rebounds and recovery. I'm curious actually, how do you see actually the recovery? Is it okay, there will be still, we were struggling, just say 2022. Of course, it's all depending of the, well, now we have the Omicron version and stuff, but of course, all depending how things will go. But if you see like overall, what is your expectations in travel? You think as soon things become, well, just say more under control, you think it will rock and say we'll bounce back super quick, or you think it will take many years before we go back to pre-pandemic levels? Nishank, start with you.
Yeah, yeah, sure. I think it's the person who can answer it probably has like a crystal ball, right? So I don't think there's any perfect answer. But maybe I can answer it in two ways. I think first is, if you look at the general market consensus, 2021 definitely was going to be a transition year. By the looks of it, even 2022 is going to be a transition year. I would be very surprised if the overall market gets back to close to 2019 levels. So it looks like 2023 should be the year where we recover, where vaccines become extremely ubiquitous, boosters become extremely normal, and then people go back to their normal life, right? So I think that's the prediction that we have. Now, if you look at specific markets in the travel ecosystem, and I think this is where it gets interesting, is you have Europe, and you have sort of regional travel within Europe. You have America, and you have regional travel within North America, which is doing pretty well, right? As in, I think relatively during the summer months, during the travel months, it did pretty well. Some parts of travel are doing better. So obviously accommodation, as you said, especially alternate accommodation. I was reading some reports in the Netherlands. I think domestic travel in the Netherlands is like 95% back to 2019 levels, right? So all the Germans and the Belgians who couldn't travel have been compensated by people like me who never went outside of the Netherlands for 1.5 years and took all my holidays here. So I think the key is going to be, how do you activate some of these big regional markets? The concern to me is sort of Asia and I would say Latin America in terms of how that bounces back. We have quite a large sort of outbound business into these markets. And I think those markets are much more closed at this point of time. And it's going to be a struggle to see them recovering for at least the next 12 months. So in a nutshell, sorry. In a nutshell, I would say 2022, Europe, North America, I think, probably strong recovery. And 2023, I think more of a global recovery overall.
Okay. And if you're looking at your vertical, if you look at tourist activities, you see, of course, vacation rental is doing well. You see, people still want to travel. You see probably maybe change also in maybe bookings. Maybe you see a difference. Okay, people taking more tourist activities outdoor compare, for example, with indoor activities. So what is the trend? What you're expecting for if the recovery starts? What do you see as a trend?
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I think initially you had this entire focus towards more domestic travel, so more in-country travel, and within that also more outdoors, right? So for example, if you look at our top selling products in Amsterdam, yes, it is the museum, but it's also the cruises. If you look at the city cruises, I mean, and then if you look at the UK, you had all these national parks and things that are outdoors that are doing really well. So the recovery started like that, I would say, in May and June. But by the time summer came, everyone wanted to go back to the big attractions, right? So volumes were pretty strong. I think the only difference is that attractions also had restrictions in terms of slots, and they also had to adapt to their technology in terms of managing people within that. So yeah, I would say outdoors is a strong trend, but as we recover, I think we're going to go back to a more traditional type of travel, because people want to go back to the cities and do the things that they haven't done for 2 years.
Okay, perfect. Well, Matthijs, you're in the same space, tourist activities, and it will be great to have your view on this as well.
Yeah, I think Nishank already shared a lot of excellent points here. I guess for me, it's two phases. So one is there are still a lot of travel restrictions. So yeah, there's not a lot that we can do about that as a company. And I agree. I also see some concerns, especially in Asia. I think the latest research that I saw from McKinsey about Thailand, they are aiming for 2024 for a full recovery. And I think that's also a personal learning that in the beginning of this pandemic, I think together with a lot of colleagues, we all felt like, yeah, this is like really bad news, but hopefully in a year, things will be better. And then 6 months in, we all felt like, well, 12 months, maybe this will take a little bit longer. So every year, like Nishank mentioned, 2021 transition year, 2022, maybe as well. And who knows, 2023, I think a little bit less, but I think this is going to take a while. So that's one. First, that is something that needs to be resolved. And then the second thing for me is, what is going to change when people can actually go back to travel? Because I already see right now that people in the tourism activity space, our customers, and maybe that is a bit biased because we have a different audience, but they really care about health and safety, for instance. They prefer to do this with smaller groups instead of 50 people together. So I think, yeah, that is definitely a change that we are already thinking about today, and that will be even bigger moving forward. And the final thing I would like to add is supply in general. So do you have enough tour guides available? I guess the same goes to some extent for accommodation, some other services. Again, in the beginning of the pandemic, we all felt like it's a pause button. You put it on hold, you just wait, and then you pick up your business as you left it. I think now we are all seeing that's not the case. And I'm talking to some of our tour guides, and they say, hey, I'm out of work for 18 months. At some point, I need to find another job, and I would love to come back to the platform. But of course, not everybody comes back. And I think that's a challenge for us, but for many companies in the space, to make sure that you actually have the supply available when demand comes back.
Well, that was one of my questions indeed. Of course, you see if you look at the industry, like a lot of people works in the hotels, actually they move to different verticals, different industries. So hotels are struggling to find people, similar with restaurants because restaurants were closed. Well, I think it's same in your business. Local tour guides, really depending, of course, of your business, right? It's okay if there's no people not traveling, there's not much tour guiding to do. So indeed, how do you cover this? Because in the end, you have to keep them loyal, try to keep them indeed as a tour guide. They need income, right? I think the majority is self-employed and as a tour guide. So how do you actually create still this loyalty, interact with them, so to still make sure that as soon as the recovery starts, and again, I think we all agree 1 year ago, I think in the same period is okay, things should become better soon. Well, it's now 1 year later. And everybody's expecting in this 2021 December around Christmas we could be happy with family again and still with restrictions, right? So again, I think there's a lot of uncertainty for your tour guides. So how do you communicate with them and try to make sure they actually start being available for you as soon as the recovery starts?
Yeah, so I guess communication is really a key element, and also being transparent. Like there is a lot of bad news, right? And I cannot make that any better. So I think then it's also fair to say, no, we don't see an immediate recovery in the next month. Otherwise, I think you're giving people false hope. And we just try to keep people engaged. And for me, it's totally fine and perfectly acceptable if they have another job. I just hope that they would love to come back to do something that they really love. Because imagine that you do tour guides because you love the freedom, you love to share your skills, the passion you have for your city. And then you go into, I don't know, maybe cleaning, for instance, which is totally fine, of course. But if that is not the thing that makes you really enthusiastic, yeah, then at some point you would like to come back. But I think you also have to be realistic and think about how are you going to onboard new guides, because maybe not everybody will come back. So that's the approach that we are taking. Make sure that you keep the existing community engaged, help them as much as you can, maybe also with education, some training, things they can do in the meantime, give them all the freedom they need, and at the same time, think about finding new hosts when you see cities that are really picking up and are in full recovery mode already.
Well, the topic is about online. I know, for example, startup in the US, Triploop, they're doing group travel. Well, if something is, pretty, you put a pause button, but I would say it's nearly dead currently, is group travel, right? And what they actually do, they had tour guides as well. So what they did actually, they organizing virtual group tours where people just apply after joining. So they go to a specific place and actually it's virtually. What is your view? And maybe Nishank and Matthijs can quickly respond to this. What is your view on actually moving into virtual tours? Just okay, we're just visiting a museum virtually, or we see a tour guide with a camera walking around the city and actually just tell about the city. What is do you think this is temporary, or it could be something more for the future when actually technology will be better there? So Nishank, you?
Yeah, sure. Like we answered about the market recovery, I think virtual tours is great, but it's a transition, or it's an intermediate step to going back to the real thing, right? If you want to experience a destination or a museum, you have to be there to really listen to the sights and sounds. And doing it virtually is good. I think it's a great way to engage, for example, your team. Like we've done a lot of experiences as part of our team where we do cooking classes, but as a traveler, I think it's it's not going to be the next big thing. It's more intermediary. Like Matthijs said, it's a great way to engage the guides. It's a great way to give them some kind of gainful employment in these times. And you also have people like Amazon, using Amazon Explore and pushing in this phase, just getting their feet a little bit wet in terms of tourism activities as well. So yeah, interesting trend, but don't see it being something that we will sustain for the long term. I don't know what you think, Matthijs.
Yeah, agree. So we also did a lot with virtual online experiences. On the consumer side, we found that it's hard to create a sustainable business model. People are willing to spend, I don't know, €5, maybe €10 for an online experience. So we switched to Teams, which Nishank also mentioned. I think for Teams, this is great. That actually generated a lot of revenue. But I agree with Nishank. I don't see this as a business that can stand on its own legs. What I do see is a combination. So moving forward, people plan a big trip, but before they go, they want to already experience the city a little bit without actually going there. Maybe meet a local who can tell them a little bit about the city. So that's kind of a hybrid version. And that is something that we are definitely going to invest in for the next couple of years.
Oh, you mentioned the trip planning. I think it's good to move a bit into the trip planning part, of course, and you see more applications there. And I think it's also something with Marc and George will probably have a good view on. And well, you said, okay, I just mentioned the example into innovation, right? And innovations often, I think the two keywords actually for pandemic were flexibility and innovation. If you're looking at the industry, so George, of course, you said that your company is really focusing on providing technology. Innovation. So what do you see? Do you see some changes there, the way you have to innovate and work with your partners, the way you're delivering, for example, your solution to them?
Yeah, I mean, innovation we had to do basically in two different areas. It's in the technology itself and it's the business model, let's say on the commercial side, because this pandemic affected a little bit the way people adopt technology in terms of budget spent as well, not only about the functionalities. So what we had to do, we had to adapt to this new trend that is coming. And for example, we change our pricing structure from a license-based type of software to a subscription model, software as a service. And this came with innovation itself, because we had to redesign our core engine to be able to support, let's say, subscription type of services and not installation on premise. And this worked quite well for us and for our clients. And if we talk about the coming back of the travel, to be honest, we noticed some quite good news on that. If we compare to last year, definitely we are higher in terms of reservations our clients are doing in our system, but we are very, very close now to the level of 2019. That was quite a good year. So overall, across of all our clients, we see are coming. Definitely, because we have a lot of clients that are doing accommodation. We notice that this is the trend with us. We see a lot of accommodation that it's actually both. Okay, regional more, domestic and regional more. And what we notice, and this is, let's say, a little bit of innovation in terms of business models, we notice across our clients, we have good clients that have good success on niche type of businesses. Okay, so instead of, let's say, a regular OTA that are selling to everywhere, like worldwide coverage, we notice focus type of businesses, and when you say focus, could be on specific destinations or on specific type of product, like luxury only, 4 and 5 stars, or luxury with spa only, or let's say I don't know, gay travel, or membership based OTAs. That means open only for members that will pay some subscription fees in order to access some specific exclusive rates. So the idea of exclusive clubs, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that it's innovating in a way from the business point of view, but it comes hand to hand to technology and the innovation behind the technology. And we had to do that in order to fulfill the requirements, and our clients had to do that in order to move on with this pandemic that I don't know, at some time you feel that it will never end. And maybe this will be the case. Maybe it will never end. And we have to consider that this COVID stuff will stay with us, and we need to consider it part of our life in a way, like a flu. Okay. Mm-hmm. And we need to make sure that we still have a life around that.
Yeah. Oh, perfect. Well, I think I'm happy you mentioned actually the move, of course, in different business models, closed user platform subscriptions. For the people who doesn't know, Bidroom is doing this actually for several years. So Bidroom is a closed user platform, and indeed you see the trend there. So
Yeah.
We made this movement a few years ago. You see now more companies moving into the space. But well, I think it's pretty connected as well to what you said as well, is the trip planning, the flexibility, innovation. Well, I think if we look at flexibility, of course, if you're moving from place to A to B, you have to travel there. You see, of course, airlines, of course, they were struggling. You see people taking different ways of transportation, of mobility. Well, if there's one specialist in this panel, I would say Marc. If you see the way people are traveling actually from A to B. And of course, if you look at trip planning, we talked about tourist activities, which is probably the last one you're planning. And of course, you're starting, I think in general, what the first one is mobility, transportation. So and then of course, normally, if you're looking at the flights, there was less flexibility. Of course, you see airlines moving more into flexible ways and cancellations. I think as well, you see a trend, of course, in just say alternative transportation, so something differently than flights. So what do you think now what you see as a current trend in transportation, but also what do you think is the expectations after? Well, maybe as your side, maybe we'll never come back to normal, but just say, if we have what do you think, just say your feel in 2 years from now?
Let me start with the people, because when the pandemic hit us first, and there was the first summer in Europe, at least in 2020, I was completely afraid that people would never board a bus, because you bring them in one vehicle and then you're sitting there. But as soon as the lockdowns were lifted for the first, let's say, summer or late spring, people just wanted to get out and they boarded buses. So there was no such thing as fear. And that's the same thing that we saw basically this summer coming out of, another winter wave in 2021. So that means in general, bringing people into one vehicle is, I think, for them, not a worry. So be this a bus or a plane. What we also saw, of course, and that's partly because of restrictions in travel, but also partly because of people started to explore the domestic environment more. There was a shift from air to ground travel and from international travel to domestic travel. So that whole segment that we had, where people were, let's say, taking a Ryanair flight to Portugal and then traveling from Lisbon to Porto, just to do another beautiful city tour, that was much, much, much smaller. However, the domestic segment, that the Portuguese, they living in Lisbon, travel to Porto or to other areas, or even to Spain, which is close by, that boomed completely in the summer. So some of these markets were reaching 2019 levels because of that domestic tourism. The other area, and I think that brings me a little bit how the travel would look in the future, bus markets are not very much online. So this means that a lot of the bookings happened at terminals. And of course, when you look at in Europe, that's better. Yeah, there you have higher online shares, but especially in Latin America, you had a lot of this business, just people gathering at a terminal and buying tickets. And that was, of course, not the right way that people felt it's you should book a bus and you should travel. And for that reason, there was a massive shift from markets that were sometimes like 8-9% online booking towards much higher rates. And we saw in comparing to 2019 in some countries, user growth of 300-400% in Latin America, simply because of that shift. And of course, then if you look at the domestic travel, and that really happens in these regions, a lot of Brazilians, they love to travel to the beautiful Brazilian beaches, and they do that. They go out. And if I look at conversations that I have in these areas, a lot of people in Latin America, as vaccination rates got very high now, I think Sao Paulo is at more than 100% vaccinated because of people coming in from the outside and getting shots there. Everyone is looking for a beautiful summer there, and people really want to get out. And that means companies who were mainly thinking about a very traditional business start finally to open their eyes for online, for technology. And if you look at the capabilities that you have when ground mobility is fully digitalized, this means that you have possibilities of creating more on-demand services, on grouping people smartly, on bringing people to remote locations. So for example, I don't know, smaller resorts or like national parks, and have that in a decent time, and have that also in a decent frequency. So this kind of digitalization, which is pushed by, or was pushed by, the pandemic, and of course the markets overall are still down, but the online part has grown. in many areas significantly. That brings a lot of opportunities to embed ground mobility much more into seamless travel. And that builds new segments, which were mainly supported by car rentals, which were supported by also package tours, which were supported by even a cab if you have shorter distances. That's a completely new business which arises and which will, I think, boost very, very fast in the coming years, not only on the travel space, but also on the commuting space, which will take a new market also in the mobility sector, taking away more space from private cars. So I think there's a lot of movement. Still, we are in when you look at ground mobility and when you look at bus, we are probably that small, like in perception, that very small group in travel. So the airlines are the big guys, so everyone looks at them at this point of time. But bus already now is moving more people than any other mode of transportation on a global level. It just hasn't been really visible, and it just hasn't been really let's say digital and ready to integrate, and that's now happening. So I think that's a very interesting time, and as horrible COVID was and still is, I think that sparked a lot of thoughts and movements in the business, also new technologies that facilitate this. So it's exciting times from that point of view.
It's really interesting, but I think if you're looking at transportation, often it goes together with the word sustainability. So I want to address this topic a bit. Of course, when you're looking at if you're booking an airline now, you just can compensate your CO2 and etc. And of course, it's often connected. Okay, is there what is better for the environment? What is the impact on the environment? Actually, if we start traveling, there's a lot of discussions now. Maybe people should travel better, maybe less, but then etc. So if you see, for example, at ground transportation, bus transfers, I think if you're looking at a vertical which can innovate is the you see the electric vehicles, or you see, of course, buses become electric as well. I think there, of course, the impact could be much less, of course, when you're moving more to electric buses. But if you look at sustainability in your sector, in your vertical, Marc, if you compare, for example, ground mobility compare with airlines, what do you think will be the innovation, and what do you think what can be done actually to reduce CO2 or actually work on sustainability in general in your industry?
It sounds a bit arrogant, but I think bus is by default sustainable in a sense. Of course, you could use a bike, or you could walk. That's more sustainable, but it's by default the most sustainable mode.
Well, from Lisbon to Porto, the example, if you don't mind, I'm not going to take a bicycle or just walk.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I'm saying within the modes of transportation that people could use for certain distances, bus by default is the most sustainable mode of transportation. And of course, I think number one, the key would be, and that's even more than important in electric vehicles, which of course is also a leverage on sustainability, is bringing people into combined mobility in general, or combined ground mobility. So this means, like I just mentioned the Istanbul airport before, like, get rid of all these cabs that float into the city and just bring the people in the bus, which is already there. So this kind of a, let's say, shift in visibility, or making bus more visible, will by default already reduce the carbon footprint of travelers. That's the one part. And the other part, as I said before, is technology. So if you are able to group people smartly and create on-demand solutions, that doesn't have to be a big bus, but this can also be smaller shuttles or mid-sized buses, bringing people together, like, for example, to attraction places. Some people don't necessarily want to have that kind of a completely packaged service, but they want to organize it by themselves, and then just adapt to the right attraction place, book the right tour guide, but want to go there by themselves. So they want to have that flexibility, and the more the technology is there to bring them into that area, will take away this kind of a travel experience which you have by using your own car or renting a car or whatsoever. And if I look at flights, I mean, we know that the flight vertical has probably been touched most by the pandemic. And at the same time, there are these effects with flight shame. And if you look at the EU short distance travel will be by plane will be banned. So this is something that is taken away by governments step by step. So that will be shifted to train, that will be shifted to bus, depending on the distance. So this is already happening. So I think no one would want to go from, I don't know, Beijing to Berlin by bus or by train. That's clear. You will always have flights, but ground can be much better in capillarity into feeding direct flights. And I think if you look at who has won in flight recovery, that's all these kinds of airlines which do point to point. These have grown most, but people need to get to the airports to have that point to point direction. So also there's a lot of opportunity connecting the different modes of transportation in a smart way to feed airlines.
There's a lot of discussions as well going on that taking a flight is actually too cheap, right? If you can take for 40 euro, you can fly somewhere. Is it not ridiculous that you can just actually impact the environment so much for such a less money? Maybe we should increase the price. People should fly less, taking these other ways of transportation. But there's a lot of discussions in there. Do you think, last question, but do you think flights are too expensive? Probably going to say, or are they too cheap? Probably going to say yes, because more people will take a bus. But do you think flights are too cheap?
I might not make many friends if I say yes. I would say it really depends. I think number one, planes need to be full. That's good for the environment if they lift off. That's one thing. And then of course, if you have, let's say, a plane that is only half full but is having higher prices, you might not win something either. So I would say if you give taxes or if you put a cost on the expenditure of CO2 on various levels, you will have an automatic price effect for the modes. And then, of course, once this is done, you have the market run again, and some players will be able to offer much cheaper prices, but compensating by default or paying the tax by default for the CO2 consumptions, while other modes of transportation or mobility will get that kind of an advantage because they probably have a tenth of the footprint that you see there. So that kind of let's say, smart regulation or smart way of let money and consumer minds choose at the same time will help. And the second part of it is that quite often it's not necessarily the only reason is not necessarily the price, it's also the comfort. If for example, you take a train and you are within that 4 or 5 hours range, it's much more comfortable to board a train. I mean, you just go in, you sit, you relax, you open your laptop, you're there. Same for buses, but usually they cannot go as fast, so the distances are a bit shorter. And if you board a plane, you know what you have to do in order to access the plane before. And then the question is like, how can you solve these comfort topics? Like if you sit on a sleeper bus, one example, some of the bus companies have been successful of creating overnight services when they went into luxury. That was usually the best business case there. People are just sleeping, or train services, overnight train services. This is something you just wake up at the right place. And then you have this kind of you don't have this kind of time and comfort problem anymore.
Okay, well, I think while we integrating in our platform that you can compensate CO2 after making your reservation, now we're going to add soon that you can also plant the tree, etc., because it's a bit what the business is asking for. We added eco labels on hotels. We have a cooperation with Green Tree, etc. So often as well, it was for us, these things are actually connected to technology, right? We have to make sure we integrating those partners, etc., in our platform. George, if you see you're working with a lot of B2B partners, do you see a trend there that your partners actually asking for solutions? Okay, can we indeed add some components during the booking process to do the compensation for CO2 or other ways of compensating?
Well, so far we didn't receive such requirements, such requests, but I think it will come closer that longer. And and we need to adapt as well, because we are in the connectivity world. So we have a lot of partners already connected. What we had, for instance, was a lot of information about COVID rules, COVID regulation, health measures that we had to put in as part of the content. So basically, each time a new regulation or a new information, important information is coming in place, we had to adapt. To it. So we are doing it by nature. This is what we do. So far with the CO2, we didn't receive so many, but I don't know. We'll see in the near future.
What I just shared, indeed, we launched an eco label on our platform. I think in the same week, actually, Google did the same and Booking.com did the same. So actually, it was pretty, well, I would say a coincidence, actually, that in the same week, 3 companies actually launched an eco label for their accommodations. And I think if you look at industry, you see, of course, it's more promoting, of course, and people are maybe try to travel better or more thinking about, okay, how can I take care of the environment? We know, of course, all the impact. What you mentioned, George, as well, is the niches, right? And before, you said, okay, there's luxury travel. Do you see a trend as well more into sustainable travel?
Yes, definitely. And this is linked also with the transportation, because as far as I can see, we have a lot of demands of, extend the accommodation services with activities and transportation, not only by car, but also by trains or by buses. And this is something we're now checking to see how we can connect partners. And this is linked also to regional and domestic travel, especially regional, because, okay, maybe with domestic you can take your own car, but regional, although you can take your own car, sometimes it's it's easier, it's friendlier to pick up a train, for instance, or a bus. And to combine your booking journey with multiple segments and multiple services. So basically the basket philosophy. So be able to build an itinerary. This is something that definitely we are checking, and we already have some partners integrated, and we are evaluating some others at the moment in terms of API connectivity.
Well, if you look at sustainable, of course, the word can have different meanings. I think one word is also connected: sustainable business model. Well, you mentioned before is different business models. You see, of course, you mentioned the closed user group memberships. You move to a SaaS model, as you just mentioned before. And it's an interesting trend, right? You see companies changing their business model, maybe more sustainable, recurring income, etc. One thing I want to address as well is, for example, metasearch, right? And it's an interesting topic that you see actually the metasearch which are out there. If you look at sustainable business models, I think their current business model is not so sustainable anymore as it was before.
To be honest, I had some doubts being sustainable any time, to be honest, because it's the business model itself. It's view based. I mean, and view to book ratio is quite high. So the business model of metasearch, as far as I know, is per display and not per booking itself. And because of that, you cannot align very easily your costs with your revenue, because the revenue is the booking, but the cost is per let's say per search, per your offer to be displayed in a search page. So because of this gap, definitely you start paying a lot of money, and you don't have all the time enough bookings based on that channel. But on the other hand, this metasearch were all the time and still are quite good marketing, let's say, tool for your distribution of your image or your rates or your name. And if you don't consider that now, you have to innovate on the marketing. So you have to find different channels for your business, niche or not, to be largely known to your audience. So that brings another type of innovation, another type of technology, another type of mindset. But you have to somehow consider all this.
Well, you can see the metasearch changing, right? And that's also my question to Marc. You see it changing. TripAdvisor came with the TripAdvisor Plus program, which is pretty identical as our business model. Then you see Kayak, they launched their own hotel brand, Lifehouse. So they actually have a large audience. Well, we can skip Google. I heard they also do some meta search sometimes. But you see, of course, they're changing. Of course, they're shifting a bit in different business models, more sustainable business models. They hope for, because of course they're getting less and less from the OTAs. Marc, if you're looking at just say Meta or Meta Search in general, you are a Meta Search platform, as you described already before for buses. But if you look at the Meta Search industry in general, you see a shift there. And what do you think will be the future for Meta Search?
I think in the future for meta search, it depends also a little bit on the vertical and what kind of areas you are offering. So first of all, we most of our partners paid or pay us by the booking. So not only by view or by click. And that is also very helpful to show transparency of the performance. What we also see when we work, we don't only work with OTAs, we also have a lot of direct partnerships. But of course, we don't do the booking ourselves, but we deliver the customer to the partner and give the partner the opportunity to create loyalty on his side, which is really a very big value for those who understand it and work with it. And if you look at conversion rates through that funnel, they are sometimes tremendously, or quite often tremendously high if that whole funnel works, because in many areas the user wants the comfort of the search, finding the right things at the right time for the right purpose, but then is also interested in a branded experience. So it's not necessarily that the user, let's say, steps out of that part. So I think that is a big value of meta search, that you are able to aggregate a lot of content and a lot of relevant offer to the audience. I think in the bus space, this is something which is, as the business is on a, let's say, a few years behind other areas like flights, for example. The benefit of aggregating the very fragmented content to the user is probably much bigger than it is for flights, because there, I think usually the differences in content, when you compare the different search engines, they are not that big. So I think there's a much bigger need of differentiation. If I look at Kayak, for example, we started to work as a partner with Kayak, forwarding them our ground mobility inventory, because also they look into changes of market. There is it's not happening right now because most people still have a flight mind searching with Kayak, but people start to think in different direction, especially at let's say different distances. So I think that core benefit of meta search is relevant, but then of course as a next step you need to add on more features, a better user experience to stay within in that core benefit. That's what I feel, but of course there might be other areas and other verticals where I don't have deep insights, maybe on tours and activity space or other area where that kind of a differentiation is, or need or requirements for meta search is already at a much different level than we see in mobility.
Well, you mentioned the word loyalty, and I think it's super important. Right? And we addressed it shortly already with Matthijs about loyalty, and I'm curious how Nishank and Matthijs think about loyalty, because of course, if you look at loyalty of an airline, it's pretty easy because you have a loyalty program. The same with airlines. It's different because you not have a loyalty program with a specific tour guide, I guess. So I'm pretty curious what you're gonna do as we want to go into recovery. What can you actually, if you're looking at the tours activity space, what can you actually do with loyalty there? So Matthijs, start with you.
Yeah, good question. I guess that is also one of the hot topics in our space. And I guess it really comes down to how can you increase the frequency in which you have contact with a customer, right? And I think if you look at a company, also a company like TUI, but Nishank can speak to that, Booking, Airbnb as well, they also offer accommodation. And then in addition, they can sell an experience, for instance, or even transport. And I think that makes it a lot easier to make sure that you have a regular touch points with your customers. As we are just in tours and activities, we don't have that. So we have to come up with ways to stay relevant, even outside of those trips. Because, how many times a year do you travel? Let's say you're an avid traveler 5-6 times a year, but it's already quite a lot. But then in between those trips, if you cannot offer anything else, I think you have a serious issue, because if people love the experience, but they only think about your company in 12 months from now, probably you have to pay to acquire them again. Maybe you don't offer the service in their next destination. So that's for us really the driving force behind thinking about loyalty as a whole. So a program where you do some incentives, that could work, but I guess you can also look at the business model itself and think about what can you really offer that is valuable to people and that lets them come back on a more regular basis.
Thank you, Matthijs. Well, Nishank, of course, you have a lot of B2B clients, so directly, of course, your customers are in contact with their customers, so it's a bit differently, but still, you also have to create loyalty with your own partners, right? So how do you see the loyalty in there, and how can actually help loyalty actually in the recovery?
Yeah, so I think we look at loyalty, I would say, in two ways. So one is loyalty within the trip. So let me take an example of TUI, right? You book an accommodation or a package 5 months before you travel, and then we have a 5-month window where we can communicate with the customer often. And when they travel with us, either before travel or in destination, we are selling them different things, different points of communication, as Matthijs mentioned, and we are selling more, right? That's more a lifetime value sort of play. And if you look at sort of TUI data in that context, if you see customers who buy a TUI activity or an excursion are 18% more loyal, 18% higher NPS than someone who just buys a pure accommodation or a package, right? So it clearly shows that, activities and these add-on services improve loyalty. The second piece of loyalty is more long-term loyalty, which is, can someone come back to us without us having to pay Google or any other sort of cost per acquisition play? And I think that is where tours and activities is a really interesting, channel, because say if you're a Booking.com customer and you finished your trip, you booked an activity with us, but then 4 months later you want to visit an attraction or something in your vicinity, in your local town, you start looking for that particular brand, right? So I think, and that's what some of the larger businesses are trying to do. TUI, Booking, Expedia. How do you make that, as Matthijs said, 5-6 times a year? That's the most affluent traveler, the craziest traveler. But if you look at the normal traveler, it's 1 or 2 times. And how do you take that to 4 or 5 transactions a year? So I think that's the place that we're really trying to use activities as the engine for that.
Okay, perfect. Of course, you're part of a larger organization. The rest of the companies are a bit smaller, it's within startup phase, or scale up phase. It is interesting what is happening. I remember I was just say 1.5 years ago, I gave a presentation. It's okay. I think that startups, disruptive startups, innovating startups actually can come out stronger if they're doing the right things, and maybe the corporates and stuff, they just have to go into massive hiring, they have to go into layoffs, etc. You see now in the last few weeks, you see massive acquisitions again happening. You saw Booking.com acquired Gather Room, eTraveli. So you see, I saw some short-term rental platform yesterday for Casa bought another company. So there's a lot of things happening, and you see actually that the large ones are actually buying the smaller ones. So what is and we have 5 minutes left to give a short answer, so just keep it for 1 minute each. What do you think, who will benefit eventually from this? Well, benefit is maybe not the right word, but actually who can come out stronger actually after this pandemic? You think it will be the disruptive startups who are innovating, or you think the companies, the large ones who can acquire now? Nishank, start with you.
Yeah, I think all of us know this, right? Pandemic is about liquidity, capital to ride out the wave. So, if you're a startup who's well funded, or if you are a large corporate with access to state capital, I think you will be in a much better position than some of the smaller companies. So that would be my view as of now. But if you are a disruptive startup, I think it's more about making sure you can convince people that you've got something that is unique. And if you look at Hopper, which is not a startup, I think it's a scale up, it clearly shows you a unique business model, very different from transactions, and they have raised a lot of money in the pandemic. So yeah, I would say that's the playbook for a startup.
Yeah, no, I think I agree there at Hopper, and I met the guys as well 1.5 weeks ago. It's impressive what they're doing, innovating actually travel by offering cloud solutions, etc. But
absolutely,
we're not much time left, so quickly go to Marc. Who do you think will come out stronger?
I think both will come out stronger, and the ones that are in the middle will be the ones that lose, because I think the giants, at least if well managed, have a big opportunity, or had a big opportunity of enlarging their portfolio relatively cheap and relatively smart, and they are doing it, and they were doing it. And on the other hand, I think if you're a relatively small company, you have a lot of flexibility to modify product, to hop on new trends, and also to inject that kind of an innovation, especially in the mobility sector. A lot of things are coming up to inject that innovation also into larger distribution channels and scale relatively fast. So I think if you're somewhere lost in the middle, then probably you have the toughest time coming out of this crisis.
Perfect. Well, George, you innovated during the pandemic, right, with your business model. So for sure, with a reason to come out stronger, to actually have recurring income. But what is your view on this? Who do you think can just say benefit?
I would say I kind of agree with Marc that the extremes will be quite beneficial, the giants and the small ones, and the middle it's kind of in a gray area. If we move a bit the discussion to the technology companies, I would say that a smaller technology company now has the opportunity to shine because of the flexibility, and the bigger technology companies who used to work on a enterprise type of installations, etc. It will be a little bit harder for them to downscale to, let's say, a cloud-based subscription model, and that will put them a little bit in a not so good area. So the tech company, I would say the small or medium ones that are more flexible to migrate to the new trend of business, it will be in a better position than the huge ones.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, George. Matthijs?
Yeah, so really short, I guess the pandemic has just been an accelerator for a trend that was already happening. And I think we see it in the travel space, but it's not new, right? I think we saw it with e-commerce having an impact on traditional retail, then with communications. Look at WhatsApp, a company with 10 employees, and it became a really, really, really big company in just 2 years. So I think in travel, like Nishank said, capital is really important. Big companies have access to that. But if you have a good idea, you show real innovation, there is also access to capital. So my answer will also be both will benefit. And indeed, if you are in the middle, you're going to lose out.
Okay, well, interesting. Let's quick and just give a quick answer, and then we're finishing. So I just want to hear, they say success of a company can be timing, could be team, could be business model, could be idea. Which one do you choose? Quick answers, Nishank?
Team, if it's a startup.
Okay, Marc?
Autura, one might not know, but it's about autonomous travel.
Matthijs?
I'll just prepare for the future, so I'll go for something in the metaverse. Okay. We'll keep you posted.
George?
I think it's a combination of team and technology.
Okay, perfect. Well, the time is finished, unfortunately, because I could speak with you for many more hours. So, guys, thank you so much. Stay safe, and hope we'll travel. We'll start again, and hopefully next year see you in person.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael.
Bye,
Cheers.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.